Hey everyone, it's Byron. I'm here to testify for Jesus Christ. I'm going to cover a dream that I had on January the 6th, 2022. And I'm going to be looking at my screen off and on because I've got it written out here. One of the few times that I actually wrote something out. It said, I dreamed I was in a room with my son and there was a painting hanging on the wall. I put a picture of a museum room with one single painting on it. Just realize that is symbolic of the room, but not necessarily, that's not the painting that I saw. There were clouds in the painting that I saw in the background, and a man was riding on a trowel in the foreground of the painting. And just to get you oriented on what a trowel is, I'm going to show you a picture here of, this is George Washington. He's got a trowel in his hand. Here's also a picture of a trowel. This is a Masonic ceremonial trowel. This is the same color, the same design that I saw in the picture. The trowel and the man were suspended in the air as if the trowel was an airplane. Trowel, excuse me. And there was a hole in the trowel so that when the man could fit through the hole, and his upper body was above the hole, and his lower body was below it. Then a man walked into the room, and I asked the question, isn't this supposed to happen in the future? And then he replied, no, it happened in 1948. And he said, and I was there when the bombs went off. He went on to describe the scene from 1948, stated that he was 21 years old when he did it, and that it was a very startling description to me. At that point, the dream was over. I woke up. And then I just wanted to cover some of my thoughts along the way. I've had a couple of days to think about this. Well, actually, one day. I believe that he was referring to the birth of Israel on May the 14th of 1948, and then the Arab-Israeli War, which started on May the 15th of 1948. But I think that I was referring to a future Israel, he was talking like, well, Israel started in 1948, but in the dream I was also referring to a future Israel that Jesus Christ will rule, and that would happen at the time of his coming when he will rule and reign with the saints from Jerusalem. Even on into the future where, there's a new heaven and a new earth, and the old heaven will pass away. And then John saw Jerusalem descending from the heavens. I think some of the symbology in the dream would mean that Freemasonry uses trowels, which I've already shown you a picture of. And then they pride themselves in building. And I'm not necessarily specifically talking about the building of buildings, but also empires. You can see some movies nowadays where, and documentaries also, about the role of Freemasonry in the United States. Similarly, you could also say the role of Freemasonry in the foundation or the formation of Israel as it is today. Especially the moving of the chess pieces around the world in creating a space for Israel again in their homeland. And I put down here that Israel, Freemasonry, and other cult religions use the same star symbol in their symbology. The flag of Israel is two stars, one's pointing up, two triangles, one pointing up, one pointing down. That represents as above, so below. You can find the same thing in Masonic halls. There's a picture here of a guy. He's ready for a ceremony, and you can see the stars behind him. The star, it's one star when the two triangles are placed on each other. But it has the meaning of as above, so below. And what I have learned over time, if you see this diagram here in the middle, you can see right in between the man's forehead, it representing being enlightened, like just as there is a God in the heavens, but they're not talking about Jehovah, the Father of Jesus Christ, but so you can be a God on earth. That's what they're speaking of when they say as above, so below. And I also think that the man that was riding in the trowel, it was like this in the picture. So the top part of the man, his upper body was up here, lower body was down here. I also think that that was also indicating as above, so below. In another dream, maybe 5 or so years ago, I dreamed about my home that I grew up in. And I was at the street looking at the house that I grew up in. And as I was looking at that house, I heard or was caused to know, I can't remember, I'd have to try to sort through a bunch of notes. But I came away with the understanding that because of Freemasonry, I had a place to live. It sounds almost as if I'm starting to say two things. I'm saying there's a good part of Freemasonry and there's a bad part of Freemasonry. I have said that, etc. And I'm going to clarify that coming up. It's very critical, I think, that people understand this. But I feel I should mention that there's also a document available on the internet. I'm going to put the document here on the screen. You can pause it when it gets to the part where it's talking about 3 world wars. But this document supposedly was written by a man named Albert Pike, a 33-degree Mason, who was actually a general in the Civil War in the United States. You can read about him on the internet as well. But he wrote in there that there was going to be 3 world wars. And the first 2 were used, and if you pause it here, you can read it. The first 2 were used to set up Israel. And there's a term that maybe you should be familiar with called Christian Zionism. And that is Christians supporting the reestablishment of Israel, and then helping Israel even as of today. Right? John Nelson Darby, a dispensationalist, he in the 1800s when he began his dispensationalist thing, that brought an awakening to people to do Christian Zionism. And also the Scofield Bible, even though it came about after the establishment of Israel, or after this was well into motion, let's put it that way, it basically shared Darby's view about that. And that is how this idea of supporting Israel came about. Proponents of Christian Zionism use various different parts of the Bible to prove how we should support Israel today and vice versa.
The blessing of blessing Israel brings a supernatural prosperity to the person, to the church, to the nation that truly blesses the Jewish people. The golden key to releasing God's supernatural prosperity on your life is found in this simple verse. I will bless those who bless you. Say that with me. I will bless those who bless you.
I learned that 2 of the chapters that they use are Isaiah 66 and also Ezekiel 37. I'm going to just read a verse from Isaiah 66 that would pretty much disqualify Isaiah 66 as part of prophecy to say, well, this is how Israel came about as it is now, because this is the prophecy that prophesied that. And when you look at Isaiah 66:12, you read that, for thus saith the Lord, behold, I will extend peace to her, and that her represents Jerusalem, like a river, and the glory of the Gentiles like a flowing stream. Then shall ye suck, and shall be borne unto her sides, and be dandled upon her knee. And that's like, you will be raised by Israel. Raised by Jerusalem. And when it says peace, and I've got peace there in my mind, and I realize there is no peace for Israel today. So you have to kind of just set Isaiah 66 aside. There may be some phrases in there that they grab a hold and they teach, but Isaiah 66 wholeheartedly doesn't support this. And Ezekiel 37:26, it reads like this. Moreover, I will make a covenant of peace with them. It shall be an everlasting covenant with them, and I will place them and multiply them, and will set my sanctuary in the midst of them forevermore. And you can pretty much disqualify that as applying to today too, because it's talking about peace and he's going to be in the midst of them. So that's futuristic. I just took a picture and put it in here. This is a picture I got from an article where they were claiming Isaiah 66 and Isaiah 37 as to support Christian Zionism and the prophecies that brought Israel into being today. But I don't agree with those. However, there are prophecies that would show you what's going on with Israel today. So I want to go to Zechariah 12, and I'm just going to read 2 verses. And that is Zechariah 12, 2 and 3. And it's, "Behold, I, the Lord," and I've inserted the Lord there, but just to give you who is I am. "But behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the people round about, when they shall be in a siege against both Judah and Jerusalem. And then that day will I make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people, all that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces, though all the people on earth be gathered together against it." That is a prophecy that I believe could apply to Israel today. And when you read that, you realize, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling. And that immediately puts the Lord in charge. So you have within this dream symbology that kind of like you can point a finger and say, well, Freemasonry set it up. There was Freemasons that wrote about it, etc., etc. But then you read, I, the Lord, will make it a cup of trembling. So you start realizing, well, who's in charge? And you realize, ultimately you realize that God is in charge, even if the Freemasons are doing it. Jehovah, God, not their God, which they call Lucifer their God, but Jehovah's in charge. He's using them. He's moving them as like a pawn in a chess game. They're being utilized to take care of business. And I went to Isaiah 45. Let me read Isaiah 45:7 to you, just so that you can kind of. And for me, when I first started messing around with this verse, it literally felt like my head was having to expand to take in the understanding of what I'm about to read. And in Isaiah 45:7, it reads, "I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all things." So I just want to just tell you, when I consider this, I literally think God is in control of everything, good and evil. We can point and say the devil this, we can point and say Freemasonry that. And that's true, because each person in their life has the opportunity to choose depending on predestination, I guess you could say, of God for a person's life. Because like there are Christians that are in Freemasonry now that should come out and probably know they should come out, and some have come out. And you can see what I'm saying. But God's in control of all this. So even if we can say, well, that was an Illuminati thing, that was Freemason thing, etc., we have to also acknowledge God creates all this, and he does all this. And I come to this point where I realize, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and he did all creation in 7 days. And I believe that the spirit that was within me, my soul or spirit, or what you want, the everlasting part of me, was actually created then. And now, through the course of just human reproduction, my body that was on this earth, my dust or whatever that was made into this body, carries that very spirit. And I'm here on this earth, and it's as if it's a game or a challenge to me to find my way back to God. And there's one single solitary hope that I can find my way back to my God, because I was set free to choose from all these different various things that God has laid out to trip us up. It's a challenge. I hate to make it sound kind of unbiblical, but literally in my mind, when I consider all these things, I think that this is a test. And the test is, if I'm put into a corruptible body, will I find my way through all this maze of obstacles back to my God? And if I do, how do I do it? And I can tell you, Jesus Christ, he's the door. I mean, through Jesus Christ, and then the Holy Spirit as our helper. So in this pilgrimage that we have on this earth, and by pilgrimage, the implication is that we are not of this world. We are of another world, but we're passing through. In this pilgrimage, we have the choice, the chance to make Jesus Christ Lord of our life. And in doing so, render ourselves to the guidance of the Holy Spirit, or walk in the Spirit, as God said he would walk in us. So I think some of the reason, I'm about to start crying, you know, I do this from time to time, but I think some of the reason for this dream was for God to show me, Byron, I'm orchestrating everything, and even the things that you think are bad, I'm orchestrating them. And then I think, well, God, if you're orchestrating them and you're promised to be with me, you can guide me through these things. You can help me. You know, that's how I feel. So that's what I did with that dream. I mean, you know, I've had these ideas before. I personally believe the dream confirmed it to me. It showed me that Freemasonry has a place in God's plan, but it's not a place in Christianity. And Christians shouldn't be involved in that. As I've mentioned, Revelation chapter 2, starting at verse 18 through 29, that Jezebel is Freemasonry. And there's going to be tribulation because Christians are flirting around with it. But even though God forbids or doesn't want Christians to be involved in it, doesn't mean it doesn't fit into God's plan, because God uses Freemasonry to move the pieces around on the chessboard, such as to establish Israel as a cup of trembling in these last days. So that's what I got. I wanted to share it, and I hope that that's helpful. You know, the main thing that I think is helpful for me is that I want to be linked with God in this pilgrimage. And I don't want to allow one of these obstacles that he's actually designed into the game. I don't want to allow one of these obstacles to break that link, you know. So I'll let you go. Goodbye.